Vinny, thank you for having me. Excited to be here today to talk to you about Salesforce and consumer goods at Salesforce. My name is Sunil Rao. I'm the Vice President and General Manager for the consumer goods industry at Salesforce. And I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about what we're hearing in the industry and some of the cool new innovations we're bringing to market. So thank you for having me.
Sunil, this is always fun. CPG, I know you guys call it consumer goods, but CPG is always slightly ahead of the market. All the cool ads, all the Super Bowl ads, and also it's always fun to listen to consumer good presentations. Thank you for coming on board.
Absolutely. So I thought we'd kick it off and give you a little bit of an overview of what we've been hearing from customers and kind of what's been going on in the market. I think we're all very aware of the headwinds that the overarching, and not just the CG industry, I think the world is facing right now with all the inflationary pressure that's been taking place, the economic uncertainty, and consumer goods is of course not immune to this. And the way that we're seeing not just those economic forces, but also what's been happening, I would say almost brewing over the course of the pandemic, play out, is you have this continued pressure on consumer goods brands to deliver, and this margin pressure that's coming from multiple locations, whether it's retailers continuing to double down on products that they're introducing that are white label, or you've got brands that are direct to consumer that are popping up that are actually, their whole value proposition is, hey, I can sell you the same thing that this premium product brand is selling you, manufactured in the same factory as they manufacture it, but it's no name, and I can sell it to you for cheaper direct to consumer. So you've got margin pressures from something retail has been doing for a while, which is white label products, but also incumbents coming in and introducing new products. So that continues to be a trend that we're seeing. Supply chain issues. Who's heard about those over the course of the last 2 years? That's been continually an issue, leading to unavailable products, leading to almost an erosion of brand loyalty in some cases, because now consumers will buy what's available, right? When you don't have baby formula for your kid, you're not exactly focused on, am I going to take this specific brand or wait for it? You probably want to get it immediately. So there's that element at play as well from a product availability standpoint. And I touched on brand loyalty, but I think what we've been seeing is brands are finding it harder and harder to appeal to the consumer and continue to balance between the premium offering for the consumer that wants to buy their specific product versus, hey, this consumer's in the store, they're just looking for something in that category that's going to meet their immediate need. So how do I...
On the product delivery, both Walmart and Target announced something similar in that they had the wrong kind of inventory. So those they have are not matching what consumers want. What consumers want, they don't have enough of. So it is really, supply chains are really under pressure.
Yeah, and I think, Vinny, the interesting point here, I was just in a executive briefing with a customer yesterday, and they're in the coffee space, and they were talking about raw materials costs increasing, sometimes as high as 50%, 100%, depending on what market we're talking about. So that imposes this constraint now. I mean, even forget about the costs going up, even the availability of the raw materials to produce the product. And then they were also talking a little bit about, it's not just the core product, it's also things like paper cups, the way that you deliver the product to the consumer. These are all having issues that translate ultimately to availability downstream. So now, what do you do about these things? There are many macro forces at play. And some of the things that we're hearing customers address head on is to start thinking about looking at how they're spending money. Makes sense, right? 20% of a gross profit of a CPG company spent on trade spend, probably a good place to look when you think about, hey, if I'm going to spend that same money next year, how do I further optimize it? Given all these macroscopic trends, given the economic climate, what kind of activities do I put in place? How do I change the plans that I have to go to market with specific retailers or specific channels to then optimize and maximize revenue to get more bang for my buck? So that's kind of one area where we're seeing some investment. The other one's store execution. We just talked about it, right? If your product's not on the shelf, consumers aren't buying it. So how do you make sure that not just your direct field force, but your ecosystem is enabled to make sure that when a consumer is going in to buy the product, whether it's in store or it's online, it's available. Or if it's online, it's something that you can fulfill on time, and they continue to buy your product. And then finally, when we talk about loyalty and we talk about, the tendency to jump between brands, this is a tough one, because in a inflationary environment, do consumers really continue to buy the premium offerings, or do they kind of change their buying habits and now start buying the cheaper option in some cases? So in that environment, how do you get smarter about what you're positioning? And what we're seeing customers start to think about is, how do I better understand the consumer? How do I have a solid understanding with first-party data? Because then I might learn things like Gen Zs actually care much more about sustainability-driven values on product packaging than millennials do. So I can just get much more targeted with those premium offerings and try to retain brand loyalty that way. So we're seeing different strategies emerge. This isn't holistic by any means, but
first-party data also tied to kind of at least piloting some direct-to-consumer, or is it more from a targeting perspective?
I think it's both, Vinny, because I think some brands thinking about it as an ability to even start collecting this data. Because, one magnitude of order separated, in terms of the data that's captured by brands versus retailers, brands are constantly trying to think of, hey, how do I build that relationship? So if there is a compelling D2C offering, and it really depends on, I would say, the sub-vertical of the CPG company. FMCG significantly harder, but maybe in apparel and premium luxury goods, you have that opportunity to build this database. So I'd say once you have the data, then it's a matter of how do you take it and enhance your reach, or think about what you're bringing to market, and then hyper segment and kind of localize what offerings you're bringing to market. So, the reality is a lot of the customers that we speak to still have to deal with these 4 gaps, if you will, that exist across the enterprise. And, these things are chapters of discussions in amongst themselves when we talk about disconnected data. Well, if you ask a CIO to show you their enterprise landscape, the number of boxes you typically see on those slides, right? It gets really microscopic really quickly. But it's a real problem, right? We talk about real-time systems, we talk about agility. Well, it's really hard to do that when you haven't thought about your data pipelines, when you haven't thought about how you've architected your data strategy to support what it is you want to bring to market from a capability standpoint. So that continues to be a challenge that a lot of folks are looking to solve. Manual processes, I think this the constant comment about Excel being the world's #1 analytics platform, right? People continue to do things offline, and they continue to do them on paper or manually. You get into emerging markets, traditional trade markets. Sometimes it's just the easier thing to do if you put the overhead of a tool that's not easy to use into the hands of reps or the hands of folks that are using the technology. So that continues to be a problem. Consumer privacy with first-party data and the death of the cookie. This has been a topic area for what do we do now? How do we continue to think about building that one-to-one relationship with consumers, but do it in a way where we respect their privacy? And then, of course, the age-old, are you structured correctly as an organization to ingest the change, not just technological, but also the way you're going to market and adapting to the strategy that you're implementing at the company? So how do you think about breaking these functional silos? Can technology play a role to help you think broader? So big overarching themes.
On the disconnected data, I had a startup presented me about specifications, and I was like, specifications? And it was eye-opening. He said, it's not just data is disconnected. Units of measurement are so different from department to department, right? And so functional silos have their own languages.
Yeah, agreed. And I was talking to one of the largest CPG manufacturers in the food side, and disconnected data within the company, of course, is a problem, but then also in terms of how they work with their retail partners. Like if you think about a retailer and a brand, they both have their own version of the product hierarchy, right? The products that they're bringing to market. Then the retailer's got their view. And even trying to have a conversation across the brand and the retailer to agree on a joint view of what a P&L looks like. Hey, why should we do business together? If you do these activities, you will see X benefits. To translate that, this data layer needs to be mapped. right? In order to have that business conversation, whether it's in a tool or even just in a meeting. So,
A big retailer, we used to have bird feeders. I remember going into one 2 weeks in a row. And I said, I bought this last week, and they couldn't find it because it was a different SKU the week after. So.
Yeah, no, it's difficult, right? If you don't have a view on your inventory, it's very difficult to keep the customer happy. So I think, key reason why this is one of the top areas that we continue to see in every strategy. So Vinny, look, I mean, this is why, we kind of look at the customer 360 at Salesforce as all of the products that we bring to market, whether they're products like Tableau, products like MuleSoft, or there are core horizontal products like Sales Cloud, Marketing, Service Cloud. But we've invested a lot in building industry-specific capabilities as well. And if you look at the entirety of the Salesforce portfolio, which we call Salesforce for Consumer Goods when we talk to consumer goods companies, it's really about how you take each element of that customer 360 and leverage that to be closer to the customer, or in the case of consumer goods companies, the consumer, or even in some cases, the employee themselves. So the employee of the CG company is also, the recipient of some of this technology, in the sense that, as folks that work at these companies, we have an iPhone, we have a B2C experience when we buy things from brands. You also want to have that same experience with the company you work for, right? You want to have the same grade of technology, the same experience. So why not think of it as 3 dimensions? It's the employee, the customer, and the consumer. And that really is the essence of everything you're seeing on the screen here, which is, if you think about perfect in-store execution, it's related back to that point about in-store availability. How do you make sure that you're executing to plan across markets, across channels? Think about increasing profitability, dig a couple of clicks deeper. How do you do that while optimizing how you're going to market, how you're spending your trade spend, right? How you're planning promotions? What's your plan for how you're going to sell through those retail customers? Then on the B2C front, the shopper front, the consumer front, how do you build the relevance of the brand? So this is that discussion around first-party data, leveraging capabilities within our marketing portfolio to engage with consumers in a personalized way, measure the efficacy of ad spend, measure the efficacy of how you're building your brand image and how it's being portrayed to consumers. And then finally, the work efficiently. So, I think we've all seen this. And once again, I think back to a meeting very recently with a customer, it's a customer based out of Italy. And they were talking about the trends in the US versus Europe in terms of working from home and the return to the office. And the reality is, I think in the US, there's probably a much more lasting change in the percentage of people that will physically come back to the office for office workers. Whereas in Europe, the culture is a little different, where a higher percentage have returned back. And for them, selling products to offices or business locations has a material impact on the business, looking at the steady state post-COVID. So once again, what are the tool sets you give this growing workforce that's probably going to be some approach of hybrid in the future? So,
and so consumer goods for you is the packaged goods, fashion. What are the micro verticals you break it out into? And
yeah, so great question. I love to use this example, Vinny, because I think it captures it all. It's the washing machine, it's the detergent you put into the machine, and the clothes you put in, and probably the snack you're eating while you're watching the clothes get washed. So it's a pretty broad definition of CG, containing durable goods, FMCG. But we find a lot of these processes are overlapping within all these subverticals. So this is how we kind of think about the overarching overlap. So that's kind of the solution set. Now, you might be familiar with the strategy for Salesforce. We have this platform. It's elastically scalable in the sense that you can have a company that has 1 employee, or you could have a company that has 100,000 employees, and you can leverage the platform. All the core functionality that's actually shared between our core clouds from a platform level, like workflow automation, that's all in this platform layer. Then when you look at the layer where it says clouds, think of this as the core capabilities like sales, marketing. These are business functions, but they're not industry specific. You could talk about sales within a manufacturing company or a consumer goods company or a financial services company. They mean slightly different things, but it's still sales. So we have a portfolio of clouds that are focused on, let's say, the horizontal capabilities. Then you've got the industry clouds. And the strategy there is to get one step closer to the customer and build things that are much closer built to the needs of that industry. So examples of that are retail execution. So technically it's sales in the field, but it's a very specific way of doing sales that's specific to CG companies. Trade promotion management is another example. It's really focused on sales forecasting, but not in the way that you would do opportunity forecasting in typical sales. It's more focused on selling more product. So you build the capability that does exactly that. And we find that this strategy gives us the ability to give our customers what they're asking for, which is much more out of the box functionality when it comes to the needs for their business. And that brings me to, the exciting announcements that we just announced for the enhancements for consumer goods, Salesforce for consumer goods. And if I cover off a few of them, I just touched on trade promotion management. That has been kind of something we're really proud of, and we've been working on cooking up for the last year after we announced the acquisition of some IP from Accenture. Trade promotion management is probably one of the most important capabilities that our CG customers would have liked to have, but we didn't, and that's why we invested in it. And it really is a mission critical functionality when we think about that 20% of gross profit, that trade spend, that needs to be managed more efficiently. So we're excited for that to launch. And alongside that, we've also announced an accelerator for consumer goods via our integration platform, MuleSoft. And what this does is it really speeds up how quickly companies can adopt a capability like TPM, trade promotion management, and integrate that to your back office systems like an ERP, where you've typically got all of your master data, and very quickly kind of get that in to your core CRM, so you can start leveraging the trade promotion management or retail execution functionality. So that's an accelerator to speed.
Is that the prime integration point, an ERP, customer master, or is it meant to be broader than that?
MuleSoft is much broader than that in terms of the ecosystem. This accelerator specifically speeds up the integration point between the back office ERP and TPM system, because typically we see a very specific integration pattern, which is your product hierarchy, your customer hierarchy, your pricing data, all that stuff needs to live in the TPM system as well.
So the revenue side of the ERP, yeah.
Exactly. And then we also have announced our penny perfect pricing capability on top of our retail execution platform. So think of this as those order takers in the field, whether they are in a modern trade market, the back of a Walmart, or in a store where they have no connectivity, but they still need to be able to capture an order and price it. We can now do that completely on the mobile device offline, and much more relevant in emerging markets where you actually don't have connections sometimes when you're out in the field, and you need to be able to capture orders, you need to be able to collect cash. So this really brings CG Cloud to another level with the offline ordering capability. We've also announced some enhancements on the consumer goods intelligence side. So specifically from an analytics standpoint, bringing capabilities that give us execution related metrics and dashboards in a much easier out of the box way for customers to adopt. We've also announced the ability for us to deploy marketplaces for CG customers. This is another interesting topic, Vinny, that's been coming up a lot with brands, especially brands that are thinking about, how do I pair together with other CPG companies that might be in non-competing categories and provide an offering where I make it interesting for a retailer to come to one site or one location to purchase multiple products from multiple brands. Because the alternative is, you have 25 sites as a retailer to go to, and you've got to make your orders on each one. So we're excited about this one because I think it gives the opportunity for some companies.
Would this be so you could sell assortments of other brands? Would this also include delivering pallets that common with those brands, or is it primarily focused on just the order taking?
So this is primarily focused on the order taking side. So it would be the actual storefront and the ability to have the products listed from multiple sources into an aggregate marketplace. But I think the interesting part is depending on which market you're in, there are a multitude of fulfillment options. And even in our ecosystem, we've got partners that do some last mile delivery fulfillment. So you can plug and play depending on which market you're in if you've got the capacity to get the last mile. And that brings me to the end of this list. The other exciting announcement is, and then this comes back to the first party discussion we were having, right? So once you as a brand have created, whether it's through a direct to consumer relationship.
On the retail execution, is that mostly for small retail stores in a developing country, kind of a smaller 7-Eleven, or is it bigger grocery stores too? I'm just thinking, trying to do that on an offline setting, is there a limitation to where you can use it?
Yeah, so it would be for both, Vinny. I think the way to think about that is in some situations where you're in a 7-Eleven, typically, if that is part of the route that's established by the CG company is something to go audit, you might just be going in and actually just making sure there's stuff on the shelf, that it's been loaded from the back room, product availability, capturing metrics like that. And then in the emerging market use case where you're actually going to a small mom and pop shop and you're capturing the order for them, in some case even doing van sales, right? So the capability is able to address both. It really depends on the customer and their needs, and they can configure it to both scenarios.
Okay.
So that was retail execution, and just to tie things off with the customer data platform, we're excited that we have a deeper integration with Google Ads now, and this is really focused on making sure that we can help brands further utilize the first-party data they collect to essentially reach more consumers, leveraging Google's marketing platform.
Excellent.
So lots of exciting announcements. And, I also wanted to share, and coming back, Vinny, to your question about what sub-verticals were relevant in, this is going to give you kind of a little bit of diverse overview on all the different sub-verticals and types of customers. So a lot of the things that we've been discovering so far, in some capacity, each of these companies are using those capabilities in that sub-vertical. And very specifically here, these are all consumer goods cloud customers. So that retail execution question you just asked, well, all of these customers are doing some variation of that, leveraging our technology. And that brings me to, the actual meat of it. So this is what we've announced, and this is kind of the key areas. So if you think about retail execution, one of the key things that we're focused on helping brands achieve is do more meaningful things when you're conducting the visit. So not only go to the right locations, but also make sure you're doing the highest value things you can at that store. Those things may be just checking the shelf, or they may be upselling a specific product depending on the assortment that store carries. And that can be dynamic. That could change in the course of a couple of visits. So how do you stay on top of what the most recent and relevant conversation is as you're going in? And then, of course, I covered this already, but how do you make sure you're also offering the most up-to-date pricing when a customer decides to make the purchase while you're in front of them? So that's really on the retail execution side, the key core areas that we're kind of excited to launch. And, the overarching premise for Salesforce for CG, specifically for Consumer Goods Cloud, has always been, how do we take these folks that are out in the field and how do we take these order takers and make them order makers? Meaning, get smarter about what you're positioning rather than just repeating the same task over and over again. How does the tool help you do that? And there are companies like PepsiCo that are leveraging this at scale. And this is an exciting journey that they've been on with Salesforce. But you can see that the types of benefits that they are getting from using the platform really comes back to, how do I optimize? I think one of the things is like reducing windshield time, right? So how do I spend less time driving? How do I have the optimal routes? And how do I optimize which customers to visit? This is a common theme that we see across customers that leverage this capability. But broadly speaking, PepsiCo has been a great customer. They recently, working with our partner PwC, actually brought live in close to 30,000 users in their business. So it's excellent to see, the scale at which this can be deployed in a company this big, and the types of benefits you can bring to that field force when they're using the tech correctly. And then that brings me to the second big ticket item, the Consumer Goods Cloud Trade Promotion Management capability that I talked about. And really, once again, this is all about the promotions themselves. How do you plan what you're going to market with? How do you plan how much money you're going to be spending from a trade spend perspective? How much are you going to be funding for initiatives for the year? How do you track that funding? How do you optimize that throughout the year? Real-time reporting becomes key because it's important to have this functionality and capability as a CPG brand, but it's also important to know how it's performing as you go through the year. And tying this back to the previous capability, the retail execution capability, really changes the game on how you can measure the effectiveness of what you've planned as you're going through the year. And then you can course correct. With real-time reporting, you can understand where you might be reacting to additional sales, more incremental sales than you had planned. So how are you dispatching merchandisers in the right way? And this brings me back to an example from PepsiCo once again. When you think about Super Bowl, right, and you think about setting up these fancy displays in all these retail store locations, that there's going to be a spike in sales from a promotional standpoint. So one of the problems you have to solve is, how do I allocate more capacity from a resource standpoint in the field to make sure all those displays get set up, make sure everything's merchandised correctly. And then from a promotional standpoint, that's something that you would have forecasted. So the connectivity between these two becomes really important because it's how you act in the field after you plan it. That's real-time reporting. Funds and budgets, once again, the financials behind this. So I've allocated X amount of dollars for these activities. How am I tracking against that allocation? How are my customers coming back and claiming the money from me? Is it chargebacks? Is it discounts on the order itself? How much am I spending with these customers? But then what's the ROI on the promotions that I've run? How effective have they been? Another key capability. And claims themselves, it gets tricky sometimes in the industry, right? Because customers will sometimes short pay brands, meaning that, when they're supposed to pay for an order, they'll say, oh yeah, but I actually, I'm paying you a little bit less because you owe me X for that other promotion that, so there needs to be a way in your accounts payable department to be able to capture all of those and reconcile it back to the money that's owed. And customers like ABInBev. So ABInBev, Vital, who's a great customer of ours, actually spoke at the Promotion Optimization Institute a couple of almost a month and a half ago, talking about the story for ABI and how they've kind of undergone the journey with Salesforce. And ABI was a customer prior to us making the acquisition from Accenture of this IP. And that's why they're able to talk about the product we just released. One of the things that Vital likes to talk about is really how they thought about trade, but not just in isolation. Once again, coming back to the point on how it's tied to field execution, but really thinking about it in an omni-channel way. And what I mean by that is, you look at the customer, you look at how you serve them, but then you also look at how you execute against that customer. And you look at how you can execute against that customer across the multiple channels in which you can serve them. So, one of the key driving capabilities for them was to think about leveraging trade as a way to define a best process across a couple of markets, get the users to love the tool. One of the things that he likes to talk about is taking something that is a very tedious planning process and turning into something that has a positive NPS score from the users, right? So that's a key area for them, which was really the focus on the user experience that the product has, and then driving adoption of the tool through a really attractive user interface to get them off of manual planning processes. So that's the ABI story in a nutshell. But once again, really excited to have them as customers and leveraging the trade promotion management capability. And then MuleSoft. I briefly touched on the Accelerator, but really, if you look at how it's wiring together, the capabilities that you would bring in from a back office system like an S/4HANA, an SAP ERP on-premise into Consumer Goods Cloud, but then also tying it in potentially into a PIM, right, product information system, where relevant. It's really about time to value, right? How can we quickly get these implementations up and running? From my experience in my previous career, as an implementation consultant, one of the first things you do on a project for TPM is you map out the master data, where it all lives. How do you go through cleaning it up and then getting it into the right system before you start implementing the system itself? So once again, really excited to have this out there because we think it's going to change the game and how quickly we can get TPM up and running for customers. So I guess I'll naturally pause there, Vinny. Would love to get your thoughts on what you've seen.
This is great. All this is since the last, 6 months?
Yeah, a lot of what you've seen is coming out in this release, but it has been a journey over the course of the last 6 months, about a year. But yeah, no, we're excited that it's all coming together in this release.
Great brands. You don't have fashion in there. Anything for fashion in this?
Yeah, we find that in apparel, footwear, we definitely have customers that leverage our Commerce Cloud or Marketing Cloud. And I think, if you think about the percentage of direct to consumer in that subvertical, naturally a lot of the B2C capabilities are a lot more relevant. On the B2B side, we definitely have them using some functionality, but not as robust as in the FMCG space.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for the update.
Thank you for having me.